All right, lads, I've been thinking about this for at least 2 minutes. It appears that Dado beat me to my own upload, so hey, I'm not copying him, I promise. Actually, you know what? I am copying him. We're going to roll with that. We are looking at the entirety of the Destiny raids and dungeons as of the final shape. This list is updated as of August 10th, but it includes all the raids and dungeons. Now, it stretches the definition of encounter to be as inclusive as possible. I don't agree necessarily, for example, that something like Raise the Spire for Vault of Glass is an encounter, or I don't agree that jumping puzzles or jumping sections in raids or in dungeons count as encounters. They count more in dungeons than they do in raids, but for raids, for it to count as encounter, usually what I think is it has to have a mechanic, it has to have a wipe condition, and it needs to be recognized as a triumph. This is easy for most, if not all, of the Destiny 2 raids because they all have triumphs inside of the game, so in my opinion, it's easy to determine what the encounters are, but in an attempt to be as inclusive as possible, because I made a lot of people upset last time that I didn't consider something like Raise the Spire an encounter, I'm going to be including everything. So, here we go. Now, when we talk about the tier list, this is ranked from a stage of S through F. What I think is S is the best of the best, cream of the crop, obviously. And when I say it's an F tier, I mean I literally want to skip these. There is no reason to actually want to play these despite having good mechanics, despite having like a good encounter. If it's annoying, or if it's boring, or if it takes too darn long, it's immediately going into F tier. That just means I really don't want to play it. E tier is going to be closer to the bottom than F tier is. F tier is, it can be good, but if it's annoying, it immediately goes to the bottom. All right, now that the list is actually fixed, let's start off. Erebus, first encounter, Shattered Throne. It's okay, you run around, you have to remember where the shapes are. This encounter is super easy to mess up, but I don't think it's annoying as long as you actually know what you're doing. It's not the worst encounter inside of Shattered Throne, to which I say Descent is the worst encounter in Shattered Throne. It's very long. Same thing with Ascent. Very long encounters. I think Ascent is a little bit better than Descent because Ascent is harder to mess up than Descent is. You have to remember that the first version of the Thrallway is included in Descent 1. I think that the second version of the Thrallway in Ascent 2 is going to be much better. And when you actually look at the bosses for the Shattered Throne, of the two of them, Vorget, the Boundless Hunger, and Dolan Kara, the Eternal Return, you have to consider a couple of things. For starters, the mechanics for the bosses. Very simple, because they are dungeon bosses. Effectively speaking, gather an orb, you either deposit an orb, or you just gather enough of an orbs to start a damage phase in the case of Vorgeth. Do I think either one is better? I like Vorgeth more. I don't think these were particularly well designed encounters, considering that it was the first dungeon introduced into Destiny 2, and it's barely a dungeon at that point. It was effectively a once every 3 week rotator activity that most of the community didn't even know existed or knew how to complete for months and months. The secrets in this dungeon, Shattered Throne, overall were cool. Overall, in terms of dungeons, it's not my least favorite, but it's not my favorite either. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. Moving on to Pit of Heresy. Pit of Heresy, I think, in hindsight, is the easiest of the dungeons that are currently in the game. There's nothing wrong with it being easy, just a symptom of its age, but its mechanics are relatively easy. Necropolis has the same problem as Descent does, that it's cumbersome to try to play through multiple times, specifically because of the inconsistent hitboxes with the arena hazards. We have to consider that Necropolis is the entirety from getting into the Pit of Heresy to doing the first section of 3 seals to making your way through the spinny rotator with the spikes. That's all included in Necropolis. But Tunnels of Despair and Chamber of Suffering, I think Chamber of Suffering is a little bit better than Tunnels of Despair. When I order it like this, when I make this list in this order, it's not to say that I think that Chamber of Suffering is better than Tunnels of Despair, but I'm going to specifically mention that it is better. So, like, if Descent was here, for example, I'm not saying, oh, well, Descent's going to be worse, but it's on the same level as these three. That's not how I'm doing it. It's just, it's not a numbered of 1 through 100. It's just, it's all D tier. But if I'm mentioning, yes, it's better, yes, it's worse, it's going to be better, it's going to be worse. Tunnels of Despair is annoying depending on when/where the buffs are going to spawn, the order that they spawn, the ogres that you can't kill. You can get really, really unlucky with ogre RNG, considering that stealth isn't a very well thought out mechanic in Destiny. Chamber of Suffering is basically tower defense. It goes as quick as you want it to go. It's super easy. It doesn't take that long. You used to be able to glitch it super, super quick. That's it. The Harrow, another jumping section, it's a little bit better than the Necropolis is in terms of jumping puzzles. I think the swinging lamps are a little bit easier to avoid than the ones that move and rotate. I don't know. It just, the jumping puzzle in Pit of Heresy has different gravy. Now, Zolmak. I think this is good. This is good. This is the best parts of the dungeon. By far, it's a good boss. It has 3 unique mechanics on how to actually trigger the damage phase. So you're not just doing the same thing 3 times. You're doing technically 1 thing, or 3 things, 1 different time each. The boss is fun. You have to manage a lot of things. A lot of different damage strategies work. Swords are good. Supers are good. Precision weapons aren't the best. Shotguns are good. You can do a lot with this guy. This is one of the best beginner dungeons to try to attempt to get into Soul of Flawlesses. If you can complete this dungeon, Soul Flawless, it's a good stepping stone. You can complete a lot of things. Moving on to the Prophecy dungeon, I like Prophecy the most out of all the dungeons in the game. However, I'm going to make a specific mention. The Hexahedron is annoying. The Hexahedron, I think, is a good encounter, but it is so annoying. If I could skip the Hexahedron, I would skip it every single time. I'm not considering the loot that you're able to get from it, but it's a really, really poor encounter. It's consistent. It takes the same amount of time. However, it's just annoying, and it takes forever. You could speed it up a little bit, not that much. Heaven and Hell, I think it's okay as an intro. Not a lot going on. It teaches you the mechanics effortlessly. It's very good as a teaching encounter, better than something like Erebus or the Harrow. I'm sorry, Erebus or the Necropolis for that matter. Leading into the Phalanx Echo. The Phalanx Echo is a good boss, I feel. The only thing with the Phalanx Echo, you can speed it up if you're able to deposit the motes in between the plates in the air. A little bit inconsistent. It's a good boss. You can kill it in a lot of ways. The shield is a tiny bit annoying as things go, but I think it's easy. Wasteland. Wasteland, you have to go through twice. Wasteland 1 and Wasteland 2 are the exact same thing. Wasteland 1, you have to go around killing 3 different pockets of taken nonsense. I mean, okay. The dunes are the most annoying part. It's a little bit easier now that skimmers are added to the game. You can skip a significant portion of it just by flying over the air. Same thing with the Dead Sea. The Dead Sea is a little bit easier now that skimmers are actually in the game. There's always been movement text to get done with Dead Sea. If you do the Dead Sea as it is intended, I do think it is annoying. It's not bad, but it's much, much easier now. The Kel Echo is a good boss. It's about at the same level as the Phalanx Echo. You know, it's very well-designed bosses, the Phalanx Echo and the Kel Echo, considering their respective dungeons. If anything, I would think that Kel Echo, even though I like the Phalanx Echo better, I think the Kel Echo is a little bit better designed. You have more to manage. You could sit still the entire time in something like a Well of Radiance, but you're probably going to die. That you have to deal with the teleports, you have to deal with the managing the light and dark of the Kel Echo arena. It's a little bit hard to tell where is light, where is dark sometimes. Leading up into the Kel Echo is a fairly tame gathering moat mechanic. You basically just play Gambit, gather 3 moats, and then kill some ogres. You can do this very, very quick, especially if you have a good fire team on the right timing and you get lucky with some of your rotations, being able to make either all dark or all light moats. I think that it is super easy. Moving on to Grasp of Avarice. Rusted Gangplank is annoying. Bomb Defusal is annoying. Fallen Shield is annoying. I think that all of the non-boss encounters in this dungeon are painfully annoying. Rusted Gangplank, when you actually understand where the traps are, even though it does take forever, it could take like 20-something minutes for most casuals. You can get that down to around 10 or so if you actually know what you're doing, know the speeds are, know what the traps are, have a fire team hitting all the levers in the right order. It's fine. Bomb Defusal, the Sparrow Racing stinks. As much as I want SRL back, you cannot deny the Sparrow Racing through flags or hitting checkpoints. I mean, you have a quick Sparrow, you can do it quick. That's fine. The route stays the same every single time, but you bump one thing, you got to start it again. You got to start it again. You miss a bomb, you got to start it again. You accidentally don't hit a checkpoint, you can start it again. I'm not considering movement tech. I'm not considering well skating. I'm not considering grappling or doing whatever it is you can to get more speed. I'm just saying these encounters as designed are annoying, especially the Fallen Shield. I know there's no white mechanic for the Fallen Shield. However, it just takes forever. God forbid the servitor heads don't go where you want to do. I think maybe 1 out of every 4 servitor head just goes off the cliff or goes in the wrong direction. I know the arenas are designed to be as friendly to the servitor head rolling as possible, but I just don't know. Heresy the Insatiable is a good boss. It's about on the same level as the Phalanx Echo. The trigger mechanic is perfectly acceptable. You gather the engrams in either room. The timers for those is based off of how much charge you hit with the Scourge cannon. You open them up, you hit the boss. This is a good testing boss for damage. A very, very consistent boss. Same thing as Captain Avarice. I feel that Captain Avarice is a tiny bit better than Heresy the Insatiable. However, it's just a big fallen captain. That's pretty much it. It's just a big fallen captain. Now, a lot of these bosses, the dungeon bosses, are not unique. You can just say, basically, oh, that's just a big version of blank. That's just a big version of blank. More so with Captain Avarice, because once you actually power up the crystal to take his shield down, he just stands there. I don't want to say it's a well-designed boss, but he just stands there and he shoots you. I know Bungie has done a little bit to try to avoid the whole trend of, oh, just stand in place, shoot a boss until it dies. But moving on to Duality, whatever the name of this dungeon is, Duality. This was the first dungeon I ever soul flawlessed. I'm a little bit biased. I think it's easy. Now, I keep on saying that phrase very loosely. I think it's easy. I think it's easy. I think it's blank X, Y, Z. For me, as a veteran player of this game, what I think is the easiest dungeon to complete from beginning to end is going to be Pit of Heresy. For any beginner, for anybody. But as somebody who has to consider as a veteran of this game, thousands of hours, what do I think is the easiest boss for me? What do I think is the easiest dungeon? It has to be Duality, despite mechanical issues and technical issues with the dungeon that still haven't been fixed. Cough, cough, the bell glitch, which ruined many of my solo flawless attempts, but this was my first solo flawless dungeon when I seriously started to get into solo flawless content. I'm a little bit biased. Mindscape. The jumping section leading up to Nightmare of Galran. It's fine. It doesn't take a long time. It's a good balance between teaching you the mechanics and actually having a traversal section. You can get this one done in 7 minutes. There's skips. There's some text you can do with grappling now. It's a fine dungeon. Nightmare of Galran, it's at the same level as Mindscape. They're fine encounters in terms of teaching you the mechanics. Nightmare of Galran is a little bit annoying if you don't get good rotations when it comes to flags. When you are solo flawlessing this, it's very easy to mess up the mechanics too. You can be in this encounter for a very long time without triggering a first damage phase if you're just playing through it blind. Descent, the second jumping section of Duality, is worse than the first one. You could say, oh, it just takes longer. There's a little bit more to deal with. Now that the actual velocity and player deaths have been fixed from... You usually aren't dying if you're at full health when you fall. This dungeon was annoying because it was easy to get physicsed and die if you weren't very, very, very careful. And because of that, I think it's worse than Mindscape. Now, Vault's a perfect encounter compared to Nightmare of Gowran. It's the same mechanic repeated 3 times in a big arena. It teaches you the flag, the standard bearing. It teaches you the bells. It teaches you managing time. This is a very tight encounter. It gives as much as you put into it in terms of the actual skill. There's one way to increase the timer. That's killing the boss. There's one way to leave. That's clearing the bell keepers, and leaving. That's pretty much it. You run out of time, you die. I think it's fine. The 3 bosses aren't unique. They have different elemental shields, so you do need to plan for that a tiny bit, but match game isn't really an issue anymore. After you finish with the vault, you have to descend further. Descend further is better than descent regular. Obviously, doesn't take as long. You can't die to physics nearly as much as you were in Descent 1, leading up to Nightmare of Kydal. Technical issues aside, I think this is one of the better dungeon bosses. I think it's better than the Kel Echo. I think it's better than Zolmak. Nightmare of Kydal gives you very focused, precise ways to beat the boss. Once you actually know the difference between all the standards and where the flags are, essentially you just have to take one brief glance at the flags or the standards that you need to get, and you just go in immediately. You should be spending the vast majority of your time in Nightmare Realm. You really shouldn't be spending any time in the overworld of this encounter. If you are, I think that you're doing something wrong. I think on average, if I'm spending 6 minutes doing a one phase of Kydal, 5 of those minutes are going to be spent inside the Nightmare Realm. That's just how I treat this dungeon at this point. For casuals, this is going to be very, very frustrating because of the bells, because obviously you don't know where the standards are. If you can remember, people use maps. I don't think you need any of that. It's a fine boss with a fine damage mechanic. You can do damage a lot of ways. It's very easy to one phase if you know what you're doing, and you can have a little bit of variety in terms of the builds that you can bring in to kill Kydal. I think it is a fine encounter. Reestablish power. Spire the Watcher. There it is. Reestablish power is a C tier. It's a very basic introduction. The power mechanic used to be a little bit more broken in that you can clear it with the pulses from Stasis Warlock. You can't do that anymore. Basically just draw a line between 2 points. It's hard to mess up. The Hydras are definitely annoying because they respawn constantly. They do a lot of damage, not to mention the Exploder Harpies. I hate the Vex in this encounter so much when they explode and when they just do uncapped or damage that isn't subjected to DR, like the way Hydras deal damage with the impact plus the AoE from the explosion. I like Spire Descent more than I like Spire Ascent. Spire Ascent is super easy to mess up. They're basically the same encounter. One's up, one's down. Spire Ascent takes much longer than Spire Descent. Spire Ascent, when you actually hit the checkpoint to go up the tower, it's hard enough to mess up, especially if the Minotaurs you need to kill don't die on the platform. They have a tendency to kind of jump off and not spawn the arc. Same thing with Descent, but Descent's a little bit easier in that matter. The room right before you finish with Descent is definitely the most annoying part, just because of where the pads on the wall spawn compared to which depends, and where the Minotaur spawns. Could be a little bit annoying, Descent, but I can't even say that it's as bad as F tier. They're fine. Like, they're fine encounters. I really don't have any core with them. Now, the first boss for Spire the Watcher, Icarus, the Siren's Current, I dislike. I don't think it's a bad boss. I just don't like how they reused the Garden of Salvation boss and just threw it at the top of this tower for the dungeon. Thematically, it makes sense. However, I don't agree with the decision to reuse it that egregiously. The pad mechanic's fine. having enemies that can snipe you while having absolutely no cover, by the way, is not good design. Yeah, it's got to go in F tier. It's got to go in F tier for me. I do not look forward to it. It's not annoying because it's easy enough to do if you've played it more than once, if you have the right build with the right resistances. I just don't like it. And out of a point of principle, I have to rate it in F tier. Persis, Primordial Ruin, the final boss of Spire of the Watcher. You have to think deep for this one on whether you consider a big wyvern or a big hydra, whatever these things are called, basically a big version of an X to just jump at you and shoot at you. Anyway, moving on to Persis Primordial Ruin. I like this boss. I don't think it's as good as Calico. I don't think it's as good as the Tormentor. I think it's about the same level as all these other bosses. If anything, I think they're better than the bosses in the Shadow Throne. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Here is what is going to irk a couple of you. Just for a disclaimer, I dislike this dungeon. I dislike this dungeon. Now, in terms of the actual encounters, 3 of them are really, really, really annoying. Hive Ritual, Arcology, and the Wreckage. These encounters take so long for no reward and no reason at all. Hive Ritual takes forever. The Arcology takes forever. The Wreckage takes forever. It's hard to speed these up because the way the pressure mechanic, because the way the water works, there's no tech unless you're finding some ridiculous out of bounds that hasn't been patched yet. These are ridiculous how long these encounters take. I do not look forward to playing these, and it is part of the reason why I do not play this dungeon anymore. I got my loot. I have no reason to play this dungeon anymore. In terms of the actual bosses, even then, you know, they're mid bosses at best. So when you look at Ektar, Shield of Savathun, I'm just gonna put it into annoying. This entire dungeon is just annoying. I was thinking that, hey, I might maybe put one of these bosses in B tier, being Ektar. I don't think that Ordnakru is better than Ektar, just because of the way the actual damaging for these bosses works. Ektar, it is easier to be able to consistently damage this thing because you don't have to deal with 1,000 enemies in any direction, plus mods, plus dealing with your damage timers. Ornaku, besides the point of having to face the 3 different light bearers through pressure and the symbol disappearing, so if you don't notice it, you can't go back and deposit it in the right place. This is just an annoying dungeon. I really do not like playing it. To the point where, if you've noticed, I've not even said its name. All I'm saying is the dungeon. It's just that annoying that I just do not like playing it. Seriously. Moving on to a dungeon that I don't think is annoying, Warlords Ruin. Rakel, the first Knight of Fikral. See, you don't even consider the lead up into this because it takes like 1 minute and 30 seconds to get to this boss. This boss is a good boss. I think it's a great boss, even. Lotus of Will and Grief, I think it's a phenomenal dungeon boss. I like the Locus of Will and Grief better than I like Rydal. Same thing with Heffin's Vengeance. I dislike Heffin's Vengeance because of how short the damage windows are, and because of the way the wish mechanic works with the marauders that come up and melee you. It's very tight. The windows, the timing, it's all very tight with Heffin's Vengeance. With a good fire team, it's a little bit less concerning, but the windows are still very, very tight. The Locus of Will and Grief, longer windows, easier ways to avoid the wipe mechanic. You can... The most annoying part of the Locus of Will and Grief is trying to convince the Scorn captains to spawn the totems, and once they spawn the totems, that's the least of your concerns. Everything else about the Locus of Will and Grief is phenomenal. I think it's the best dungeon boss in the entire game, by far. Now, Prison Escape, I think is great too. Same thing with Mountain Ascent. Mountain Ascent, obviously, it's not as good as the Prison Escape because the Prison Escape leads into the Locus of Will and Grief, but after the Locus of Will and Grief, the Mountain Ascent up to Heaven's Vengeance, I think it's fine. I think it's great. It's probably my favorite of the traversal sections. I don't talk a lot about the environments. The most annoying part of the Mountain Ascent is the big Taken Blight room that spins in a circle and puts you in a blender. But if you want to look at my overall dungeon tier list, this is it. These are the dungeons. This is what I think is annoying. This is what I think is not annoying. A little bit rambly, I know, at times. Putting enough thought that is required to complete these dungeons. Now, a couple things that are, I would say, might be controversial about this list is the Hive Ritual, the Arcology, the Wreckage, the Akdar, and the Ornakuru being all annoying. I really, really don't like this dungeon. It's annoying. I don't look forward to playing it. Once you get your loot, there's no fun run for this dungeon. It's just not fun because of the time it takes. Same thing with Grasp of Avarice, the Fallen Shield, Bomb Defusal, and Rusted Gangplank sections. They're just not fun. I just don't like playing them. Same thing with the Hexahedron. Even though the Hexahedron, I think, is a well-designed encounter, it's just annoying, you know? And explaining other sections, I mean, Kliss, if you didn't listen to me the first time and you just skipped to this section, I disagree at a principle of reusing a raid boss for a dungeon. However, I'm going to continue. I'm not going to end the video yet. Yeah, this is going to be a long one, boys. Buckle up. You thought I was going to end it, didn't you? Yeah, I got you. Moving on to Vaults of Glass. I'm going to be considering only the most up-to-date version for these raids. So all of the Destiny 2 versions of the encounters. I'm not talking about Destiny 1 encounters anymore. I feel like that's a little bit unnecessary. Except for Wrath the Machine. You have to talk about Wrath the Machine because it's not ported into Destiny 2 yet. So, raise the Spire. I normally don't count this as an encounter. You just stand around on plates and you shoot things until the objective is done. It takes like 5 minutes. You don't do anything else but kill things. Same level as Necropolis. Probably a D-tier encounter. Confluxes. Stand around and you shoot things until something happens. The D-tier encounter. Oracles. A little bit more involved than either Raise the Spire or Confluxes. We're talking about Destiny 2. You have to shoot them in a specific order. I think this is a fine encounter. Not a lot of good ways to cheese this. I myself like to shoot all of the Oracles as a solo player and just have my fire team clear out all the other ads. If you have a fire team that is doing a bad job managing ad clear, Oracles is going to be annoying. But besides that, I like it. I like Oracles. Now, Templar. Templar is a good boss. It is a old designed boss. However, 5 people have job. 1 person just hangs around. That's my only complaint about the Templar. But the 1 person who just hangs around with the shield is vitally important. You know, they can do more than just hold the shield and stop the Templar from teleporting. They can also drop it and shoot their guns. They have to break the entrapment that the boss puts upon you. You know, it's okay. They can do a lot more. He's an easy boss. You can do a lot of different things for damage. But it's going to go in A tier. Now, Gorgon's Maze is annoying the first time you do it. Let me explain. I don't think the Gorgon Maze is a good encounter. It's annoying the first time you do it before you learn the route, but this has a predetermined route that is very, very consistent, and as long as you hug the walls at the right angle, you can literally run right by the Gorgons and be done with it. There's nothing unique, there's nothing challenging. Worst part about this encounter is that if you take too long and accidentally aggro some of the Gorgon, and yeah, that just means you change their route and you have to it's better to wipe at this point. It's easy to cheese. You can pull your whole fire team through if you just have them die and 1 person runs through. You know, that's, I guess, a downside of this encounter, that the entire fire team has to make it through unless they're all dead, in which case only 1 person has to make it through. Gatekeepers, another standing around waiting simulator. It's a better standing around and waiting simulator than Confluxes because it's a little bit more involved. If you're doing Gatekeepers the correct way and you have to move the Aegis in between. If you're doing Gatekeepers the right way and you have to move the Aegis in between the 2 portals, it's a little bit better. It's easy to cheese Gatekeepers with stasis, but if you're doing it as intended, I think it requires a lot of communication. It requires a lot of movement, and despite being a standing around and shooting simulator, it is a more involved standing around and shooting simulator than either Raise the Spire or Confluxes. Now, Atheon. It's not an S tier boss. It's old. You know, it's not really fair to rank this to today's standard. Atheon is a great raid boss. splits the team up 3 and 3, forces everybody to do something, and there can be no slacking in this encounter. If you aren't killing ads, if you aren't standing on plates, if you aren't shooting oracles, if you aren't giving callouts for those oracles, everybody has a job to do. It's very hard to be a guy who just stands around just ready to shoot the boss. You know, admittedly, only 4 people technically have to have a job, and even then you can kind of like decrease that down to 2 if you have somebody who's goated with callouts and you have somebody who's goated at shooting oracles and holding shield at the same time. Cough, cough, me. Not to brag or anything, but it's easy to cheese. If you start the encounter with 1 person dead, you can determine who is going to go into the realm. So you can have 5 people on the outside, 1 person on the inside. I usually like to be on the inside to start Atheon. It just makes everything so much easier. And, you know, a little bit of a power fantasy. The Atheon boss itself, yeah, the mechanics leading up to Atheon is fine. I like that you actually get a lot of supers and encourages you to use your abilities. A lot of ads, very, very high density. He doesn't have too much health compared to today's standards, compared to today power creep. But, yeah. Atheon Time Conflux, A-tier boss, doesn't quite crack the S-tier for me. Now moving on to Crota. Stills, the first encounter in Crota, the Darkness. It's annoying. Cross the bridge, it's an F-tier encounter. The Gauntlet in between the build, the bridge, and Iryut is... It's bad. It's not annoying, it's just a bad encounter. I'm going to change where I put Cross the Bridge. Now to talk about these 3, the non-boss encounters in Crotas End, Cross the Bridge is the best of them because everybody has to have a job. If you're doing it correctly, you have to manage who's standing on the plates and when to get 3 people across, then get 6 people across. You have to do a little bit of mental math. I think it's the best of the non-boss encounters. The Stills, the Darkness encounter, it is just so annoying. Like, this hasn't gotten better. It's aged like milk, man. There's no redeeming factor behind the Stills. Now, the Gauntlet, even though it's not annoying, it's just bad. It's not annoying, it's just bad. That is the throwaway, basically. You just run and you shoot. You run and you shoot. The Destiny 2 version is a little bit better than the Destiny 1 version because you actually have to use the chalice so you can run through, but that just leads to new problems if you only have 1 person on the chalice, and then there's the time factor, having to get all the way to the end to get inside the chest room before you open anything. It's just a bad encounter, really. Iryut, the Death Singer, is an A-tier boss. Iryut is, spoiler alert, what I think is the best encounter in Crotas End. Now, the Destiny 2 version of Crotas End reworked Iryut, so there's actual mechanics you have to do. You have to go into the one of the, how many is it? 3 plus 4. One of the 7 rooms to kill wizards to be able to trigger the damage phase. It starts with 3. This is an encounter that gets harder the longer it goes on, so it actually rewards you for finishing it early. That's something I like about this encounter compared to Crota. You know, it's the boss moves around. You can't just stand still the entire time and use precision weapons to blow its head up. You're use a couple different things for damage, whether it be grapple, shotguns, technically rocket launchers. Can't really use swords. It's very varied in terms of what you can do for Iryut, but because it gets harder the longer it goes, and the actual getting to the damage mechanic in the first place is just far more interesting than the Destiny 1 version. I'm putting Iryut in A tier. Now Crota didn't get any better. It really didn't get any better. Old Crota had a problem where you had to break the shield with the weapon fire and then do damage with the sword. They just inversed that, whereas you break the shield with the sword and then you do damage with weapons. This is fine. The most annoying part about Crota is that it isn't better. There was a couple opportunities that they could have used to make Crota better, in my opinion. The Boomer Knights are a pain, especially if you're doing damage with swords. It's easy to pick. It's very easy to see what Bungie wanted us to do when playing Crota, and that is just use swords, be up and close to fill that fantasy of killing Oryx's son with his own swords. I digress. I really think that Crota is a worse encounter than Iryut. Moving up next, King's Fall. My favorite raid. That is in Destiny 2. I know. Hall of Souls for the beginning. It's a good introduction. To put it on the same level of Crota, or Gatekeepers, or Oracles, I think it's a better introduction than Raise the Spire. The mechanics don't translate to the rest of the raid. It's just a cheeky little do a ball carrying mechanic 3 times, 6 times, however many it is. Two people have to be coordinated, get the balls in at the same time. It can go in a little bit long if you mess up the balls, but no hard white mechanic. It's just you have to start over. Start at the balls. I think it's a good introduction. Crux in the Portico is at the same level as Hall of Souls, being the jumping section. The ships that float through the air are remarkably consistent. If you have trouble with it, you have never played the dungeon before, you've never played the raid before. If you don't have trouble with it, then, you know, you don't have trouble with it. Totems. Totems is the worst of the King's Fall encounters. I said it. It takes too long. The rotation is boring. You stand around, you shoot things, and then you go deposit the stacks of strength you gathered into a central plate. The Destiny 2 version is harder than the Destiny 1 version just because there's champions, just because there's more stuff everywhere, but it didn't get better. That's my only complaint when this was ported. Every other encounter got better except for totems. War Priest, it's an A-tier boss. War Priest's biggest problem is that there are a lot of bystanders. There are a lot of bystanders for War Priest. Minimum, 3 people need to do something. 3 people need to do something for War Priest. Maximum, 3 people need to do something for War Priest. Basically, half your fire team is just standing around shooting things, waiting for other people to do mechanics. If you want to do it efficiently, you can have all 6 people do mechanics, but no, that's usually not how it goes. War Priest in Destiny 2, even though they didn't really change it, you can consistently choose who is getting the brand, who is getting the aura, who is going to be calling out where the eating the Oculus, basically where the safe zone is going to be. It's consistent. There's no bugs, there's no technical issues to this encounter. You can't really speed it up. You know, you just kind of have to go and sit and just be at the mercy of timers for War Priest. But other than that, I think it's a remarkable encounter. I really do. Golgoroth. I'm putting it in A tier just so I can scroll and put it in S tier. Sorry to bait you. I'll zoom the list out a little bit. But Golgoroth, I think, is one of the best raid bosses in Destiny, period. I'm a Golgoroth glazer. I'm a super fan. Especially if you're doing it with the challenge in that everybody needs to rotate and take gaze, and yeah, I'm just considering the challenge portion of it. Normally, Golgoroth is still fine. Everybody has something to do. Technically speaking, you know, 2 people can do the mechanic, whether that be shooting the balls and exchanging gaze, and even to some extent, 1 person can do a lot of those. But Golgoroth is a very team-heavy encounter. Everybody has something to do. Everybody has a job. Everybody's clearing ads. Everybody's shooting the boss. Everybody is doing everything, except for taking gaze. But if you're doing challenge, everybody's taking gaze anyway. I like Golgoroth, not to talk about the loot, but I do think Golgoroth is one of my favorite raid bosses in Destiny 2, and it did get better going into Destiny 2 in the way that they changed the white mechanic. Instead of the white mechanic being linked to how many deaths you have, because the res mechanics in Destiny 1 are a little bit different, it's linked to how many of the orbs on the ceiling you didn't shoot. If you mess it up, the white mechanic is going to punish you only after 2 unsuccessful full completions. Transept is a fine traversal section. Traversal sections really don't rank at the top unless they're exceptional or have cool mechanics. I think Prison Escape has a cool puzzle mechanic, so that's why I ranked it in A tier. But apart from that, only bosses go in A tier and above. So B tier, Transept. Death Singers. Death Singers are the least interesting part of King's Fall. They're still an A-tier boss, if that makes sense. Now, even though they are the least interesting part of King's Fall, if you can one-phase them, if you can't one-phase them, it is interesting in the way that you have to swap damage in between the 2 bosses. But even on day 1, even on the challenge mode, my fire team was one-phasing these bosses, partially because Ward of Coil did a tremendous amount of damage to the Death Singers because they were technically classified as vehicles. I don't know how that happened, but you got the bonus vehicle damage when using Ward of Coil against the Death Singers. I'm not going to talk a lot about the mechanics because the mechanics are the same for Oryx the Taken King. Oryx Taken King is an S tier encounter. I think Oryx Taken King is the best reworked boss in the game. The biggest problem with the base version of Destiny 1 Oryx Taken King is that you couldn't speed the encounter up in any way except for jumping through the plates faster. Everybody had to be on sync to build the plates. Everybody had to be on sync to not build the plates. Everybody had to be on sync with the bombs, without the bombs. It was good. I liked it, but it's just better now. It really is just better. They made the plate mechanics simpler, and that only 2 people actually have to build the plates, which I'm perfectly fine with. I'm not saying that it's better. It's having more people to not mindlessly stand on plates, who can help out with the Adcor, who can help out with rotating to kill the ogres, and the knights being delayed. It's a lot to think about with Oryx, but once you really have it done, as long as you can agree on callouts, I say. I'm not going to talk about callouts, but the front of the room is where Oryx spawns. That's all I'm going to say. Now, we're at the machine. We don't have the luxury of having this one in Destiny 2, so I'm basically just going off of vibes and going off of nostalgia. Now, if I was going off of only vibes and only nostalgia, this is my favorite raid that they've ever made, period. By far. Everything about this raid is perfect. Now, I'm not that big of a glazer, though, so I'm actually going to rank this fairly. Foundry 113, short, simple, sweet, teaches you the mechanic of having the Siva balls to be able to damage the boss. It's a B tier encounter. There's a little bit of traversal in between that, but it's fine. Vossix as a boss is an A tier boss, shooting the screens to be able to do the damage, especially the hard mode version where the screens have a lot more health and you have to shoot them in the correct order and you have to be in the appropriate rooms to not wipe to the Siva swarm mechanic. Is perfectly fine. The Siege engine actually can say an S tier. Server farm as a traversal mechanic, if you do not include the Outbreak Prime quest, is a B tier traversal section at best. It just takes a while. You know, you can find the Randall the Perfected inside of the server farm, cool little Easter egg. But if we were considering the Outbreak puzzle, I would say it's S tier. But if you do not consider the Outbreak puzzle, it's just a B tier. It's just a B tier traversal section. Same thing as Foundry 113. Siege engine, it's an S tier encounter because of how fun it is, because the music, everything about Siege engine is perfect. They really knocked it out of the park. However, Perfection Complex, aka the first phase of Axis, where you have to break him out of his chamber, I guess. It's an A tier encounter. The Axis, the Arcan Prime. Ooh, baby. Everybody has something to do. Everybody has a cannon, an arc, a void, a solar cannon. Everybody has to run around. Everybody's jumping on his back. Everybody's killing things. Everybody's moving. Everybody's doing something. You can have no slackers with Axis, considering wherever he teleports, there has to be a person there. Has to be coverage. Has to be somebody charged. Has to be somebody with the cannon. Has to be somebody breaking legs. Has to be somebody doing damage. Everybody has something to do with Axis Arcan Prime. This is by far my favorite encounter that is in Destiny 1, that isn't in Destiny 2. Now, I've kind of changed my opinion when I say favorite encounters before. I thought that Riven used to be my favorite encounter, but after Pantheon, I kind of understand that Riven is a little bit overrated. But no, I can't glaze this enough. I actually have set up my Xbox to go back to play Destiny 1 just to go experience Wrath the Machine again. That video is going to be coming soon. TM. Moving on to the first of the Destiny 2 raids. Leviathan, Underbelly, and the Castellum. The way these are treated in this list, I think that the Underbelly and the Castellum are effectively the same thing. You use the Underbelly to skip directly to the encounters, use the Castellum if you don't want to go through the Underbelly. These, to me, are at the same level. Kind of. The Castellum is a D tier. The Underbelly, because you have to actually think to know where you're going. You have to remember all the paths, and depending on what week it is, you know, where you have to first, I think it's a C tier encounter. The Castellum, you grab flags, you pull up, you open the door, you leave. That's pretty much it. Now, of the 3 non-boss encounters, I don't like that there's only one boss in Leviathan. I'm kind of biased against it because of that. But of the 3 encounters, the Gauntlet is fun. It goes into B tier. Pleasure Gardens is not fun. It goes into D tier. And Royal Pools is just stand still and shoot things and rotate. That's it. Royal Pools is F tier. To classify why and why not I don't like these, Royal Pools got power crept basically as soon as the 400 power was available. It was power crept immediately. It became so easy. Mechanically speaking, even in the Destiny 2 vanilla version with the double primary heavy meta, it was just annoying to kill the babies who were all oiled up and running at you to go grip your butt cheeks. Killing the oiled up boy, the oiled up boys in royal pools was funny, but the way they spawned, it was just annoying. The rotations, at least, it was consistent. I didn't like prestige mode for royal pools. I really didn't like prestige mode for any of the Destiny 2 raids that had prestige mode in them, but alas, it's not the game anymore. Callus, I can't glaze Callus. It's a B-tier boss. Now, to splitting it up between the teams, between the people who were inside the Shattered Dimension and people who were outside the Shattered Dimension, I thought that being inside the Shattered Dimension was marginally more entertaining than being outside of it, just because the way you had to deal with the clap on, clap off, you know. Anyway, being in the Shattered Dimension was more entertaining because you had to shoot the skulls, you had to manage killing the Scions, you actually had to make the right callouts. And people on the outside, you basically just had to run around, shoot things, and then punch a Scion every once in a while. It was just a big waiting simulator, pretty much. A lot of these are just waiting for mechanics, but Callus is, as a final boss, it was underwhelming, let's just say the least. The reveal at the end, the twist where, oh my god, Callus are robots. Nowadays, in 2024, that basically led to nothing. It was far less interesting. It was far more interesting at the moment because we didn't know how the story was going to shape up with the darkness subplot and how big of a role Callus was going to play in the story. But they basically gutted Callus's character during Beyond Light, really, the season where Persage was entered into the game. He just basically said, "Oh, Kaklamau, he's corrupted." That's pretty much it. But story concerns aside, it's a mid-tier raid. It's probably one of the worst final bosses we've ever seen. As you can see so far, of all of the encounters that I have rated, it is the lowest rated final boss by far, except for Urnokru. But I just think Urnokru is just super annoying. Callus is worse than new Crota, by the way, just so we're clear. Moving on to the first of the layers, the reactor. Now, this is going to be controversial. The reactor in Eater of Worlds, it's not annoying. However, it is the worst encounter, period, ever. By far. It's not an encounter. It's puzzling how they thought that it was acceptable to consider this an encounter. Seriously. If it was up to me, Delve Deeper and Reactor would be considered the same encounter. They really would be. There's nothing separating the two besides standing around and shooting some Cabal and playing Fall the Leader and jumping on the reactors. These encounters are just bad. And the first time I did this tier list, they were right at the bottom. I still remain the same. Now, Argos' Barrier and Argos, the Planetary Core. Argos, the Planetary Core, is a better boss than Callus. You have to do traversal, you have to manage the heads. If you weren't at the time one-shotting the boss, you had to go up all the way to the top and jumping up all the rocks and avoiding the harpies and the hydras. It was fine. It was fun. Argos' Barrier was a worse version of Argos, but that's to be expected. You basically just did the same boss twice with the same exact mechanics, but the second part of the fight being Argos Planetary Core was more interesting than the first part. It's my feeling, my gut feeling, that Argos is better than Callus. That's pretty much it. It's just a gut feeling. I think that Argos was a more interesting, more entertaining final boss than Callus. Moving on to Spire of Stars. Statue Garden. I don't have a lot to say. I don't remember this being fun. I know playing basketball, it worked the vast majority of the time, which is saying something. The mechanics actually working. It shouldn't be saying something, but it is. Yeah, because it worked the vast majority of the time, I'm inclined to put it into C tier. Power Conduit, on the other hand, it was a fine jumping encounter, but it was a jumping encounter all the less. Repeal the Assault in Valkor. Valkor is a severely underrated raid boss, I would say. I'm not going to talk too much about Repel the Assault, because Repel the Assault is like the raid layer. You just do the same encounter twice, except one of them has a boss at the end. So Repel the Assault, by extension, is just going to be worse than Valkor. It teaches you, Repel the Assault, it teaches you how to do the encounter better than Argos' Barrier, but you know, I think Repel the Assault is more interesting than Argos' Barrier. That's why I'm including Repel the Assault in the B tier, whereas Argos' Barrier I'm only including in the C tier. But for Valkor himself, I am blessed by hindsight of having not done this raid on day one. This was, of all of the Destiny raids that have ever come out, the only one I didn't attempt on day one. I was in school. I was in school when this day one came out. All the other raids I have attempted on day one. Successfully or unsuccessfully, for that matter. I'm sorry, when I say day one, I mean within the first 24 hours. There really wasn't a raid race at the beginning of Destiny 2, but it was still tracked to see who got Worlds number 1. Now, Valkor, the mechanics of Valkor, everybody had something to do. 3 people were standing up plates, 3 people were running around getting orbs. You had to combo 2 people, a plate carrier plus a ball carrier to break the underbelly of the boss platform that he stands on, if that makes any sense, to be able to go up into the sky and basically shoot down 3 ships, do damage to Valkor. You know, we can't play this anymore, so I'm kind of just going off of my memories. I remember this being the hardest raid boss that I played during year 1, obviously. It aged very well. I think of the year 1 raid encounters, it aged the best, but we can't play it anymore, so we kind of just got to go on our feelings right now. Last wish. Man, last wish. Where do I even start? Easy. Start by ranking Kali the Corrupted in B tier. We start by ranking Shuro-Chi, B tier. We start by ranking Morgat the Spire Keeper, B tier. We go to Riven of 1,000 Voices. We rank that in A tier. We rank the Vault, C tier. We rank Queen's Walk in C tier. That's how we're doing it. The 3 bosses, my outside of Riven, are all perfectly acceptable. You know, I don't really think any one of them is better. They all have a unique mechanic. They all do something different. They all have different wipe conditions. They're all different enough where I consider them to be perfectly acceptable. Like, they're not better than each other, but they're not worse than each other either. You know, Riven, I used to think Riven was the best boss in the entire game. Previously, I would rank it S tier. I don't think so much now that Pantheon came out and we actually had the chance to run it multiple times with the real mechanics, not just cheesing. If you're cheesing Riven, it's basically an F tier boss because it has no mechanic. But if you're not cheesing Riven, you're actually playing it the way it was intended, I think it's probably the best of the A tier bosses alongside Irya. Like, Irya and Riven are phenomenal encounters, but they just aren't, you know, they aren't at the top, you know what I mean? Like, playing like Riven on repeat playthroughs, you're never intentionally going to do the mechanic. You're always going to cheese it unless it's Pantheon, but Pantheon isn't in the game anymore, so, you know. Moving on to whatever this one was called. I don't actually remember the name of the Insurrection Prime raid. Wow. Scourge of the Past. There it is. It came to me. The Hollow Map. I thought it was an interesting idea to have one person at a central point doing all of the callouts and the other 5 people running around the map. The only problem with the Hollow Map is that there was no... how do I say this? When you played with bums, when you played with LFG groups for as long as I have, you get used to people sucking. That's pretty much it. It was hard finding a team that could consistently know the callouts and not mess them up. Ablaze Glory is a Sparrow race. Now, I don't think it's bad. I don't think it's a bad Sparrow race. However, it is super, super underwhelming. Only one person actually needs to complete it because even if everybody dies at the very beginning, it doesn't last long enough where it takes more than 2.5 minutes to do. It's not bad, but it's not good either. Like, it's probably the best. It's probably the best of the D tier encounters so far. On repeat playthroughs, I looked forward to not having to do this, just having someone else do it after you got the Sparrow. But not a lot you can do about that now. Now, Vault Access and Insurrection Prime. Vault Access is a B tier encounter, and Insurrection Prime was an A tier encounter if people weren't messing up the CAP mechanic. And yes, it was CAP, C bottom left, A top middle, P bottom right. If you disagree with that, you're not my friend anymore. I remember doing Insurrection Prime on New Year's Eve in 2018, was it? Was it 2018? Or 2019 New Year's Eve. I got Anarchy that day. That's a good memory. I do remember that. I don't really remember the first time I got all the other exotics, but I do remember New Year's Eve playing Scourge of the Past and getting Anarchy. So a little bit of a lore dump there. But yeah, Insurrection Prime and Vault Access. Effectively the same thing. I think Vault Access is a little bit worse just because I hate tanks. I hate the way this game handles tanks. I don't think vehicle combat is part of the strong suit of the Destiny sandbox, but they insisted on using it, so you have to rate it based off of that. The underbelly section of Vault Access and the underbelly section of Insurrection Prime are bad because it is so easy to get wrong when you play with bums. Now, most of my career in Destiny, I just played with bums. I really did. That for the first 4 years of Destiny 2, I only played with bums until I found a clan and put together a clan of good people to play with. It's not tainted to the point, but it's easily messed up by bums. So let's just say that. All right. Crown of Sorrow. Hive Ritual is annoying. Kingdom of Sorrow, the jumping section, is annoying. Galran's Deception is a D tier encounter, and Galran the Sorrow Barrow itself is a B tier encounter. I think Callus is still worse. Callus definitely has to be at the bottom of this, but Galran and Callus are on the same level. With the actual Galran mechanics in terms of beating the Deception and shooting his hand, you break off into teams of 2, 2, and 2. You know, I liked it. I liked this encounter because it incentivized using Outbreak Prime basically for damage. This was the peak of the hot swap with Mountaintop and Anarchy meta. That was a fun meta. I don't miss it because if you didn't have Mountaintop, if you didn't have Anarchy people and Recluse people just didn't let you in the fire team, I kicked out a fair share of individuals. I kicked out definitely a fair share of individuals because they didn't have Anarchy, Mountaintop, and Recluse. Despite me never actually obtaining Mountaintop during the time when Mountaintop was available, I just never bothered to do it. All right, moving on to Garden of Salvation. Anyway, no, I'm sorry, I'm not done yet. So the beginning of Hive Ritual is annoying. I hate the crystal. I hate the crystals. The crystals are the worst part of Crown of Sorrow. I know the entire point of this raid is like swapping buffs with the crystals, but the crystals really are the worst part. I vaguely remember the crystals not working half the time. That's to say, my own personal experience with it is that it just didn't work. Hive Ritual took forever. Kingdom of Sorrow, it took forever. You know? Like, even looking at speedruns, so these are just these are the longest parts. The Hive Ritual and Kingdom of Sorrow, they were annoying. I never looked forward to playing them, and it's one of my least played raids to this day, even if you consider it's been out of the game since 2020. All right, Garden of Salvation is up next. Evade the Consecrated Mind. C tier encounter. The Undergrowth. It doesn't. I would rate the Undergrowth in F tier if it wasn't so short. Now, I didn't rate the Undergrowth initially in my first video, but this is just the list that we're working with. The Undergrowth, it's a okay jumping puzzle, but I'm not a fan of jumping puzzles. I don't think it's a good jumping puzzle, like technically, like the Siege Engine is, technically like the prison escape and the mountain ascent are jumping puzzles. Summon the Consecrated Mind is F tier. You stand at pillars, you run around, and you teleport back and forth. This encounter, Summon the Consecrated Mind, takes forever for no reward. Really, like seriously, like, God forbid you try to run 2 directions at the same time. It's going to mess all the timings up. Your whole team runs one direction in one big triangle, and then you teleport back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. It's annoying. It really is annoying. Now, the Consecrated Mind itself, I do think the Consecrated Mind is the best encounter in Garden of Salvation. In terms of the level that the Sanctified Mind is at compared to the Consecrated Mind, I would say the Consecrated Mind is definitely near the bottom of B tier, and the Sanctified Mind is in the very top of C tier. Now, I know Callus is the worst of the raid bosses in terms of design, but in terms of actual like gameplay feel, the Sanctified Mind, I am a Sanctified Mind hater. I really am. Because of the way the tether mechanic works in actually triggering that second phase of damage for the boss, you have such a short window to trigger the second damage phase, and even then, it's almost better at this point in the game to just power through with only doing one phase of damage, one short phase of damage to the boss. Because you can kill it in one short phase, especially if you are part of a good fire team and not playing with bums. But I usually played with bums. If you're playing with a good fire team, Sanctified Mind is definitely better than Callus. But I do think that Consecrated Mind is better than Sanctified Mind. Boundless Horizon is the jumping section in between the Consecrated Mind and the Sanctified... I'm sorry, in between the Consecrated Mind and the Sanctified Mind. It's not as bad as the Undergrowth, but still. I'm just going to put those at the same level. Alright, Deepstone Crypt. Deepstone Crypt, Beyond Light, this was the only thing to do. The only thing to do when Beyond Light came out. You remember? I remember, because I was there. I played for a year, and there was nothing to do until Vault of Glass got remastered. Terrible time to play the game, by the way. Surviving the Blizzard, which is the entire first section up until Crypt Security. repeat playthroughs, it's annoying. On replay playthroughs, it's just annoying, especially if you have bozos who don't know how to survive. I'm going to keep it an annoying. Crypt Security. It doesn't take too long, especially now that you can consistently one-phase the fuses. It's a C-tier encounter, I'll say. Atrax is a B tier encounter. I like the duplication. I like being able to hit the boss really hard. I like how the tracking works. I like how the spotters and the collars have to work with the different buffs. You don't have to swap them between the top and bottom levels as you do because the way power creep has worked out, but you used to have to swap them between the top and bottom levels. For the music alone, Spacewalk is S tier. It is my favorite traversal section in the entire game. I'm going to actually pause the Terraria music right now just to play a little bit of Deep Stone Lullaby from now until I get tired of it. So just take a second to listen to Deep Stone Lullaby. It's really good. There's nothing wrong with Spacewalk. I'm just going to talk about my favorite memory with this. On the day one for Deepstone Crypt, I didn't actually successfully complete it. I made it to the final boss. From the best I can tell, my fire team was one of the first 50 to make it to the final boss because of how we were able to complete Atrax and that we killed him fairly easily. We didn't think Atrax was a problem. But after getting through Atrax, hearing the Deepstone Lullaby for the very first time going into Spacewalk, when I say my brain chemistry was altered permanently that day, and it's kind of cheesy to say, it's one of the things that kept me playing Destiny, but it kept me playing Deepstone Crypt, just being able to hear Deepstone Lullaby. Spacewalk. I'm super biased here. Brings a tear to my eye. Now, the Nuclear Descent after the Spacewalk is A tier, and Tanic Abomination is also A tier. I think these are good encounters. Everybody has something to do, especially in Nuclear Descent, just the sheer chaos of it, the sheer amount of running around and doing mechanics and killing stuff. I love it. Nuclear Descent is, I like it more than Tanic the Abomination, but Tanic is a well-designed final boss. Even though it's like the 5th time we fight him, I don't care about that in terms of lore or story implications. Yeah, Deepstone Crypt is, I mean, it's a good all-around raid. The worst part about Deepstone Crypt, for me, is the fact that surviving the blizzard is just annoying. All right, now, onto the last 3 raids. All of the Bitness, all of the Disciple-themed raids, all of the Final Shaped-themed raids, so you will. Disciples Bog is annoying. Just going to start us off. Disciples Bog is annoying. It takes too long. The escort, the payload mission is terrible. Now, I'm just going to rank the other 3 encounters that I just also think are, that I just really think are annoying. In Root of Nightmares, you know, Scission is annoying. I don't like Scission. It's it's easy, but it's just annoying. You know, does that make sense? Easy but annoying. An overrated encounter, or an overhated encounter, I should say, is Exhibition. Some would say Exhibition is annoying, but not me. You'll see why. Now, in terms of jumping sections, you know, Monolith. The Monolith's just annoying. It takes way too long for effectively no reward. I really don't like having to do the Monolith. It's one of the few encounters that I will actually leave and have someone else do. The Monolith, it is just that annoying to me. All right, now actually ranking and talking about the substance of the encounters besides me saying, oh, Eve, my Fifi's so annoying. Acquisition. It is one of my favorite non-boss encounters in the game. Besides the point of just continually saying everybody has something to do. Everybody really has something to do. There's readers, there's runners. If you're doing it correctly, you can get all the timings correctly. You have to make sure you're listening and calling out to your correct teammate. You have to input the correct options into the monolith, not mess up the callouts. My fire team on the day one for this accidentally brute forced through 2 phases of acquisition, and because of that we did kind of screw ourselves because we were doing it the wrong way the entire time, thinking we were doing it the right way, but we just managed to brute force through 2 phases. We got so confused why it wasn't working. You know, this was a tough day one, but we did get this one done. Collection, the Caretaker. I like the Caretaker. I think there's a good reason why they actually brought it back for Pantheon. I think Caretaker is a well-designed boss if you go through all 3 floors just as Bungie intended, you know? Between the stunners, between the clears, between the runners, really, it's a very active encounter. Not a lot of sitting around, not a lot of busybodies. The only part is the downtime, where it goes as quick as your runners can successfully complete the darkness section and get all of the knowledge to build the monolith, basically. I think Caretaker's a really good encounter, and it's super obvious why they brought it back. Directionless, the jumping puzzle, so the second jumping puzzle, I should say. I struggle. I struggle thinking about where to put this one. I'm inclined to put it in F tier, but I don't want to put it in annoying because I actually complete it consistently. Like, I never leave for directionless unless it's like a soul flawless and I'm going to die, or whatever. Not soul flawless, unless it's like a flawless run and I just know I'm going to die, just so I don't sacrifice the flawless run. You know, I'll take the L and I'll leave just for the team. Yeah. Besides that, it's not as bad as F tier. It's not as bad as these encounters. Like, actually unfun to play, but it just takes a while. You know? Exhibition, I do like. When you're doing Exhibition the right way, it is a very well designed. It's a very well designed encounter. Like that again, like the chaos encounters where everybody has something to do. I tend to like those more than the ones where I like only a couple people being active participants. As you can tell with all of my A tier and up, everybody has something to do, with the exception of maybe 2 people. Like 4 people minimum will always have something to do, with the exception of Spacewalk. Rolk goes in S tier. He's not a complicated boss on paper, but he's fun. Now, fun is a big factor. I look forward to having to fight Rolk because of how fun he is. On day 1, a little bit BS with the way the kicks worked and the way the insta-kills worked, but once we actually dealt with that, it was a really, really fun encounter. This was on my first true low mans doing Rolk. I think it was Trio Flawless, I believe, for Rolk Trio Flawless. Cataclysm, the first encounter for Brew of Nightmares. It's a C-tier encounter. It does good at teaching you the growth mechanics, which then go into Scission, but I don't like Scission. I do like Cataclysm. Cross the Chasm is a fine jumping puzzle. It just takes too long. And you always have one bozo who never goes through. Now, Macrochasm. There's a reason why Macrochasm exists in Pantheon. I think Macrochasm is a better encounter than Nezarec. I like, which is rare, to say that I think that the final boss is worse than an encounter in a raid. But I like Macrochasm more than I like Nezarec. I think the planets are a very well-designed encounter if you do them correctly. I think the damage is interesting in the fact that there are 3 plates you have to go through and he's shooting you throughout the entire thing. It's a fun encounter. You know, Macrochasm is super challenging, more challenging than Nezarec. Nezarec is kind of a dumbed-down version of the entire raid in that you just have 2 runners and then 4 people basically running interference, running standby, you know, chaining aggro between the bosses. Brood of Nightmares is it's a flawed experience in that it just is obvious that they didn't have a lot of time to make it, you know, being the stopgap expansion, like the, oh shit, we need more time expansion. You know, we've had this discussion time and time again, but that's just how I feel. Sanctum, the first part of the Witness, whatever it's called, the End of Witness. I don't even remember what the name of it is. Salvation's End. Salvation's Edge. Edging for Salvation. Anyway, Substratum. These ones are tough, you know, because I really like this raid. I really do. It's all of these are going to be A tier minimum. I know me saying, hey, I don't like to rank an entire raid in 1 tier. I don't like to rank an entire dungeon in 1 tier, but it's just a very well designed dungeon, you know. Like, besides the one encounter that I find annoying, it's just well designed, you know. It's just a matter of like which is better than which, basically. Zenith Ascent, I can definitely say, is not on the same level as the Witness, Verity, Herald Finality, Repository of Substratum. Repository, I would say, is the worst of the 5, you know, the five combat encounters, I should say. Specifically because it being 3 rooms, especially if you've never done it before, you can't see everything. I know you're not supposed to be able to see all the mechanics before you do it, but just in terms of practicing it with bozos or practicing with randoms or LFGs, you know, it's kind of tough not being able to practice getting to a place. That's part of the challenge. That's why it is in the A tier. It's a very challenging encounter. Everybody has something to do. There are no stragglers in the repository, which is important. Repository is the only encounter where all 6 people have to do something. I know. Verity. No, 4 people have to do something in Verity. 4 people have to do something in Herald of Finality. 4 people, technically 2 people, have to do something in Substratum if you are really, really fast. The Witness, only 1 person technically has to do anything besides stand around shoot ads. Repository is the only one that I feel that 6 people have to do something if you're going to get it done in a reasonable amount of time. If you're not doing it with 6 people, you're just going to run out of time. But to talk about the Witness for a second, is the Witness a good encounter? Yes. Does it crack S tier for me? I don't think so, really. The Witness is better than Riven, it's better than Iria, but is it better than... I don't think it's better than Rolk. I don't think it's better than Macrocosm. I don't think it's better than Axis. I can go on and on with these. In terms of the actual mechanics for the Witness, breaking it down to its core components, you have the 3 hands that you need to use to get glyphs to then break his chest. Once you break his chest, you stand on a platform, you do damage while avoiding his basically one-hit, one-shot mechanic. For a boss fight, considering what the Witness should be, I cannot help but feel that it is one of the most severely disappointing endings to a raid ever, especially considering that Verity is the best encounter in the raid. I know, a puzzle encounter being the best encounter in a raid, it is a challenging thing to say. It's a very challenging thing to say, at the least. I love Verity, especially upon repeat play. It gets funner the longer you play, especially if you have a fire team who knows the mechanics. It's so rewarding to finally know how to do Verity, how to do it properly, how to carry people through it, even how to explain it to people. Like, I'm just sitting there with the shapes and I'm... Anyway, besides tweaking, I think Verity is great. Verity is a solid... Verity is the best encounter in the entire raid. It is better than the Witness. The one I haven't talked about, Herald of Finality. I don't have a lot to say about the Herald of Finality, besides the fact that I think it's a fun boss fight, and the fact that you have to challenge the boss before you can actually fight the boss, if that makes sense. I think it's better than Substratum. I think it's better than Repository. It's better than something like Iria. No. It's better than something like Keitel, the Cal Echo. Absolutely. War Priest up there. I might organize this a little bit. I think War Priest is not better than Herald of Finality. Atheon's better than Herald of... No, Herald of Finality is better than Atheon. Anyway, besides tweaking, anyway, this is it. This is the final tier list. As you can see, I figured out how to get it all on one screen just by clicking the presentation button. That's, yeah. Let me know what you think. I'll have a link to this in the description, this actual tier list, because the person who made this is the GOAT. This is a phenomenally made tier maker that I didn't have to do myself, as you can tell by the actual quality of it. Besides that, yeah, let me know what you think. Let me know where you agree. Let me know where you disagree. If anything, I would say most people are going to be surprised as to what I consider to be annoying. Now, the annoying encounters specifically, like I said, they aren't bad. They could be good. Some of them are good. I just hate playing them. I really think they're annoying. So there it is. The combination, dungeons plus raid, everything. I hope you have a great day. I hope you enjoyed watching. I've been yapping for the better part of an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes now, so a lot of this is going to get edited down. So besides that, I want to thank each and every single one of you for watching. It's Monday. This is going to be uploaded on Monday, the 19th, I think. Have a great day, and take care now.